What's up, guys? Metal Music Junkie here, aka John Browning. And today, this is going to be the start of a 5-part series. I'm going to be going over my favorite rock and metal albums of the decade from the 70s to the 2010s. Why not the 2020s? Because, well, it's 2024. The 2020s are not over yet. But who knows? Maybe I'll do a video in like 2030 talking about the best albums of the 2020s. Maybe. So this is part 1 of the series. Well, I'll be going over the albums from the 70s. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, 1970. Now, I will admit I'm not the biggest 70s fan in the world, but I do like quite a bit of stuff from the 70s. Now, 1970 had some good stuff, like Led Zeppelin 3, and Morrison Hotel from The Doors, and of course the very first metal album ever, the first Black Sabbath album. Now, I almost included that on this list because, you know, it's the birth of heavy metal. While I do love that album, it's not my favorite Black Sabbath album, so I chose the other album they released in 1970. So for my pick for 1970 is Black Sabbath Paranoid. I mean, what can I say about this album that has not been said already? War Pigs, probably one of their best songs. Paranoid and Iron Man, I'm pretty sick of hearing, but they're undeniably classics. Planet Caravan, which is a good song, and actually, hot take, I actually prefer the Pantera version to the Black Sabbath version. Electric Funeral, love the riff in this. Hand of Doom, Fairies Wear Boots. This album's a fucking classic, man. Also, fun fact, this was actually the first metal album I ever bought on vinyl. Got it for Christmas back in 2019. Now we're in 1971, another really good year for music. I mean, you had David Bowie, Hunky Dory, Led Zeppelin 4, The Doors, L.A. Woman, Nursery Crime from Genesis, Fragile by Yes, but now we would be talking about Black Sabbath again. My favorite album of 1971 is Black Sabbath Master of Reality, which is probably my favorite Black Sabbath album. I mean, this album is almost perfect. Sweet Leaf is my favorite Black Sabbath song. After Forever. I don't care for Embryo or Orchid, the instrumentals. Children of the Grave, Lord of this World, Solitude, Into the Void, probably in my top 5 Sabbath songs as well. Now, if you're in the metal, I'm sure you probably heard this, but if you're somehow in the metal, if you haven't heard this or Black Sabbath Paranoid, what the fuck are you doing? Go and listen to it. So yeah, Black Sabbath, Master of Reality. Alright, now we're in 1972. Not the best year for music for me. I'm sure for some people it's great, but for what I'm into, not great, but there was some good stuff on there, like Black Sabbath Volume 4, Genesis, Foxtrot, Close to the Edge by Yes, but my favorite album of 1972 has got to be The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie. In my opinion, this is probably peak David Bowie, or maybe the Berlin era albums from like Heroes and Low. Those are also probably some of his best work, but this is probably my favorite from him. He was already getting up there with like Hunky Dory, but this truly solidified him. I mean, you got 5 Years, Soul Love, Moon Age Daydream, Starman, Lady Stardust, Hang On to Yourself, Ziggy Stardust, Suffocated City, Rock and Roll Suicide. This is almost a perfect album. So, there it is, my pick for 1972, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie. Alright, now we're in 1973, another good year for music. I mean, you had Aladdin Sane from David Bowie, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath, Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, Pronounce Leonard Skinner by Leonard Skinner, Selling England by The Pound by Genesis, Tres Hombres by ZZ Top. But how can I be talking about rock and metal rock music? I was going to say rock and metal, but fucking rock and metal music from the 70s without talking about this album. So my pick for 1973 is Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, what can I say about this album that hasn't been all said already? This album's a fucking masterpiece. Breathe, Money, Time, Brain Damage. I mean, I can go on and on about this. So I'm not going to say anything else about it. You already know it. I know it. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon is a fucking great album. Alright, now we're in 1974. Another pretty good year for music. You had Diamond Dogs from David Bowie. Second Helping from Lynyrd Skynyrd. You had Queen 2, which almost made my list, but I was picking this one and this one I'm going to show you, but I decided I kind of like this one better. So my favorite album of 1974 is Sheer Heart Attack by Queen. This was still when Queen was kind of like in their hard rock, like, base. This was kind of before the next album, which we're actually going to be talking about. Spoiler alert. Kind of got more like progressive and stuff. This was Queen when they were just a good time hard rock band from England. And it brought them one of their first biggest hits, Killer Queen, which is still one of their best songs. But you got a lot of great songs on here. Brighton Rock, Tenement Funster, Flick of the Wrist, Now I'm Here, In the Lap of the Gods, both the first version and the revisited version. Stone Cold Crazy, which actually Metallica did. I mean, this album's just fucking great. So, my favorite album of 1974, Sheer Heart Attack by Queen. Alright, now we're in 1975. In my opinion, one of the best years of the 70s for music. You have Physical Graffiti from Led Zeppelin, Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis, Fandango from ZZ Top, Young Americans by David Bowie. You had Sabotage from Black Sabbath. But, in my opinion, you can't talk about albums from 1975 without talking about, I already mentioned it earlier, Queen and Night at the Opera. In my opinion, this is Queen's best album. To me, this is when Queen truly came into their own. As much as I love, Queen 1, which is another album I forgot to mention from 1973, Queen 2, and the last one I showed you, Sheer Heart Attack, this is when they truly came to their own. And to me, it's Queen at their most creative peak and their most musical peak. I mean, yeah, Death on Two Legs, I Can Live Without Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, I'm in Love with My Car, You're My Best Friend, 39, Sweet Lady, Seaside Rendezvous is kind of fun, Prophet Song, Love of My Life, Good Company, of course, you can't go wrong without the amazing Bohemian Rhapsody, which, am I sick of that song? Hell yeah, I'm sick of that song. But is it possibly one of the greatest songs of all time? Might even be the greatest song of all time? Hell yeah, it is. And of course, ending it with the God Save the Queen. So yeah, my favorite album of 1975, Queen and Night at the Opera. Alright, now we're in 1976. Another good year in music. You have Station to Station from David Bowie, Sad Wings of Destiny by Judas Priest, 2112 from Russ, which almost made my list, A Day at the Races from Queen, which is like the sequel to A Night at the Opera. Wasn't as good, but I still liked it. But for me, this is obvious for what my pick was going to be for 1976. My favorite album of 1976 is the self-titled debut album from the Ramones. In my opinion, this is the first truly punk rock album. Now, you could argue all day long with being Iggy and the Stooges and the New York Dolls, but in my opinion, the first truly punk rock album was the Ramones. And this album's just full of bangers. Blitzkrieg Bob, I'm sick of that song just like the rest of y'all, but it's still a great song. Beat on the Brat was probably my favorite on here. Judy is a Punk, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, Havana Affair, 53rd and 3rd. This fucking album is amazing, and in my opinion, this is the first true punk rock album. So my favorite album of 1976, the self-titled Ramones album. Alright, now we're in 1977. A lot of great albums came out that year. News of the World from Queen, Rumors, Fleetwood Mac, Farewell to Kings by Rush, Rocket the Rush Up from the Ramones, Sin After Sin, Judas Priest. David Bowie released 2 amazing albums that year, Low and Heroes, but my favorite album of 1977, and I unfortunately do not have it on vinyl or CD. Yes, I collect CDs as well. My favorite album of 1977 is Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols. Now, as I mentioned before, in my opinion, the Ramones were like the first true punk rock band. The Ramones may have been the first, but the Sex Pistols truly solidified punk rock in the 70s. Like, I love the fucking attitude of that album. I love how raw and nasty it is, and just, like, how pissed off they were, and just, they didn't give a fuck about anything. Like, may have been their only album, but it was one hell of an album. I mean, Holiday in the Sun, Bodies, God Save the Queen, Anarchy in the UK, Pretty Vacant, I can go on and on. So, my favorite album of 1977, Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols. Now we're in 1978, another good year for music. I mean, gee. You had Road to Ruin from the Ramones, Outlandos d'Amour from the Police, Jazz from Queen. Judas Priest put out 2 great albums in 1978, Stained Class and Hellbent for Leather. I know it's called Killing Machine with the rest of the world, but here in America, it's called Hellbent for Leather. But in my opinion, this is obvious. The best album of 1978 is Van Halen's debut. I'd say this is probably the most influential album of 80s rock, even though this came out in 78. Pretty much a lot of bands in the 80s were basically at least trying to do something what Van Halen did on the first album. I mean, of course, rest in peace to Eddie Van Halen. In my opinion, one of the greatest guitarists of all time. And, I mean, what he was doing on this was truly innovative, especially Eruption. I mean, I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel here. And it's just fucking amazing album. Every song's perfect. You Really Got Me, Jamie's Crying, On Fire, Running with the Devil, I'm the One, Ain't Talking About Love, Little Dreamer, Feel Your Love Tonight, Atomic Punk, Eruption, Ice Cream Man. This is a fucking amazing debut, and in my opinion, one of the best debut albums of all time. So, my favorite album of 1978, the first Van Halen album. And finally, we're in 1979, and another really good year in music. You had London Calling from The Clash, Highway to Hell by AC/DC. You had Damn the Torpedoes from Tom Petty. But my favorite album of 1979 is obvious, and I don't have it unfortunately, and that sucks because it's my favorite album by them. My favorite album from 1979 is The Wall by Pink Floyd. I mean, what can I say about it that hasn't been said already? It's a fucking masterpiece. In my opinion, it's the greatest concept album of all time. I don't think you can go wrong with that album at all. I mean, everything on that album is a 10 out of 10. In my opinion, one of the greatest albums of all time. So I'm not even going to say anything about it. My favorite album of 1979, The Wall by Pink Floyd. Alright, that is it for this album. My next video will be, I'd be covering the 80s, which this is when things really start getting good in my opinion. So, please like, comment, subscribe. Don't gatekeep. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And rock on.